Well, good afternoon, Scots. I hope you are well and safe at this current time. My name is Thomas MacArthur, and I serve as the Assistant Vice President for Alumni and Family Engagement at the College of Worcester. Today, I am joined by Michelle Pagano Heck, class of 1988, and President and owner of Nonprofit Talent, an executive search firm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Michelle, today we are discussing careers in the nonprofit sector and specifically career transitions and mobility. And I'm thrilled to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here, and certainly nonprofits are something that are near and dear, and my passion. I've worked in the nonprofit sector for I used to say 25 years. I'm pretty sure it's rounding into 30 years now, and so I'm happy to share information with everybody today.
Wonderful. Well, let me tell everyone a little bit about your background to give some perspective here. Before we do that, today's conversation is part of our Worcester Alumni Insight series, thought-provoking conversations with Worcester alumni on a variety of topics. To watch this one and other alumni insights, visit worcesteralumni.org/virtual connections. So let me tell you a little bit about Michelle. She is president and owner of Nonprofit Talent, the Pittsburgh region's leading nonprofit executive search firm. Michelle works with the social sector to improve the capacity of organizations through transition management and executive recruitment. Mission-driven, Michelle listens to the needs of her clients and works as a partner with organizations to fulfill their vision. Prior to launching Nonprofit Talent in 2013, Michelle was a senior consultant with Dewey & Kay. Previously, she worked as the executive director of WQED-FM, community relations director for WQED Multimedia, director of development for the Children's Home, director of corporate relations for the American Cancer Society, and various other positions of leadership in the nonprofit community. In addition to her background as a strategy consultant and talent recruiter, Michelle was the assistant director of admissions for Allegheny College in Pennsylvania and a school counselor at the St. Andrews School in Florida. Michelle graduated from the College of Worcester and received her master's degree from the University of Pittsburgh, where she is also a PhD candidate. Michelle is a member of the Alumni Board and serves as the chair of the Engagement Committee and joins us today from Pittsburgh. So, Michelle, when people hear about nonprofits, there's likely a million different career paths that they can consider. Can you tell us a little bit about the different varieties of careers in the nonprofit sector to just kind of set the stage?
Sure. And, one of the interesting things about this sector, so when we talk about sectors, there's private sector, public sector, government, and nonprofit sector. It tends to go into those thirds, although B Corps, there's a lot of different things that kind of bridge some of those. But the interesting piece about nonprofits is that they are as diverse as the private sector, right? So when somebody tells me, like, I want to work for a nonprofit, that's like saying, like, I want to work for a company, right? It's this like vast and somewhat unrelated subsectors within nonprofits that I think needs to be explored a little bit when people are talking about a career in nonprofits. But in general, in the nonprofit sector, careers tend to go in two directions. One tends to be much more programmatic and service delivery, which often requires very specific training, very specific kinds of degrees. An example in that area would be if you are looking at the health and human service sector in nonprofits. That might be that people need a master's of social work in order to be doing direct service delivery, or an environmental organization in which they are looking for somebody with a very specific degree in environmental science. So program parts require kind of a specific skill set, whereas the other part of nonprofits is the administration. And the administration of a nonprofit, people can come from the program sector and transition into administration. But a lot of people make a career from the beginning in the administrative aspect of a nonprofit, in which case those are very similar to sort of business or private sector jobs. It might be finance and the understanding of what really diverse revenue streams are. It might be fundraising, which is a huge opportunity for career development in the nonprofit sector. And then also just leadership and executive director and HR, all the functions that would make an organization run, regardless of what its program is, are in the administrative end. And so there is very diverse and very rich opportunities for career growth in nonprofits. And you can come from a variety of different educational backgrounds for pretty much either side of the house, program or administrative.
It's interesting that you talk about the diversity of nonprofits and the various different sectors. You're a proud graduate of the College of Worcester, a liberal arts institution. I'm wondering if you can just shed some light on how you think a liberal arts degree prepares someone for the diversity of experiences or opportunities that exist within the nonprofit sector.
Sure. So, one of the interesting things from a personal experience from my liberal arts degree, which I use probably more than my master's and probably more than when I think about sort of the skills and the work that I need to get done, it's probably things that I learned at Worcester more than even my master's or my PhD pursuits. And some of that is, I think liberal arts education allows you to be nimble and allows you to be flexible and a critical thinker, right? So when I look at my own career, I've been doing executive search work for 15 years, but it's probably like my 8th career. And none of which, I was an international relations major, right? So none of which has been related to what my major was, but everything has been related to Worcester teaching me how to be an independent thinker, Worcester teaching me how to ask critical questions and not be satisfied with the status quo. I think that those kinds of things in the nonprofit sector, which is a very rapidly changing landscape, things move quickly based on funding, things move quickly based on social need. If you look at the time that we're in right now, this is going to have a really huge effect on the pivot that nonprofits make. So you have to, if you're going to choose to be in a nonprofit career, you have to be adaptable and patient, as well as I think just really smart on your feet. And a liberal arts education does not give you the opportunity to pigeonhole yourself, to just learn one thing and only how to do one thing. It gives you the opportunity to really stretch your intellect, as well as stretching, I think, your ability to rapidly adapt. And that is a perfect fit for nonprofits. And, the other thing about nonprofits in terms of your education and where you're coming from, very few people are in like the 3rd grade taking their little, career inventory for the first time. It's like, I think it's like 3rd grade, 8th grade, and then high school. Yep. Career inventories very rarely will say to you, you really should be the executive director of a health and human service organization. I mean, right. Careers in nonprofits just aren't talked about necessarily while we're growing up, so that it tends to be an accidental career for some people, not everyone. And in that, it means that your background and your preparation for that career can be almost anything. And liberal arts, I think, speaks very, very well to that kind of broad nature of experience you need to have to be successful.
That's wonderful. That's fantastic. As you're talking, we said at the beginning we were going to kind of set the stage, but then also talk a little bit about kind of career transition and career mobility. So now I'd like to ask you a couple questions about, for those folks who have been in the field for several years, they're maybe at a kind of entry level and looking to get into level management and kind of take that first step into the next level of their career. Talk to us about the expectations and timeframes and experiences that those folks would need in order to make that jump to kind of the mid-level management, not necessarily the executive director yet, but several years in. What are your thoughts around that topic?
So I think it's probably not that different than some private sector jobs or kind of government jobs, in that you need to get into an organization that is important to you and that you feel a passion about the mission, and demonstrate your value and demonstrate your ethics, your work ethic. And then hope that you're recognized for that within the organization. Now that puts a lot on chance and just good luck. There are some things that I think that can be much more targeted and much more in your control in terms of your own career and developing your career to be able to move in a way that is strategic in your career. So to move from entry level to mid-level, if you want to stay in the same organization, which is, I think, always preferable, and organizations should be developing and growing their staff to be able to move up the leadership ladder. So if they are, take advantage of those kinds of opportunities within your organization. If they are offering leadership development, if they are offering the opportunity for you to shadow in other departments and to cross-train and to learn some other things, take advantage of all of those things, again, so that you are demonstrating your eagerness and your willingness to be a kind of a team player. The reality is, in many organizations, you need to move out in order to move up. Simply, and it's not because they're trying to, keep entry-level people down, but it's rather that there's just not enough people leaving positions or retiring, or the mobility in that organization may not be there. So you have to move out, and that's okay. In general, we have kind of a general rule in executive search that we're looking at, which is in terms of job hoppers, people who are just kind of bouncing around a lot. When you're younger, if you're sort of, I hate to define younger with a number and an age, but if you're sort of 32 or less, and you have a couple of 2 years, 18 months, 3 years on your resume, that's really quite acceptable, because people are realizing that you are moving out to move up. As long as you were moving up in each. If they're lateral, that's kind of a different worry. But if you're moving up with each of those, I think that's fine. After that point, you need to have sort of longer tenures to be able to demonstrate to employers that you're committed and that you're a good investment. So I think that those are important things to remember in moving out in order to move up. I also caution people that are willing to move a job for just like $1,000. I know $1,000 is a lot of money, especially when you've got college loans and if you're younger in your career. However, if that is the primary reason that you're moving jobs, that will probably not benefit you in the long term. You want to make sure that you're moving for mission, passion, and for increased responsibility, both in terms of title. Title's important to people, as well as the list of responsibilities in your job. And then, that's how you sort of break into mid-level, which is having, kind of cut your teeth in an entry-level job for a couple of years, and then perhaps moving out in order to get a mid-level job.
That's, I think that's super, super interesting. It's the intentionality of each move, not moving just for the sake of, a new job or a new career, new path, but really being specific in what are the things in this position that will help me grow as a professional and help me develop my skills and take on new responsibilities. That's wonderful. Your firm really does work with the executives, right? So moving into kind of the folks who have had a long tenure of a career, what are your clients? What are you hearing from your clients right now? What do they look for in someone who is going to lead the organization, especially during some pretty unprecedented times where we don't know what the future of funding will be and what the needs of the community will be? What are folks looking for? What are you hearing from your clients?
So, this is an interesting time. And as the world changed for us, it was the date was Friday, March 13th, and sort of everybody took to their homes, and that was it. As a business owner and an entrepreneur, my level of worry was huge, not just for my family. Obviously, that was first. and for my community, but also how is my business going to be impacted by this? And I thought, okay, certainly nobody's going to think about changing jobs or, making huge career moves. Well, I was wrong. The number of leadership transitions that we are managing and that we are seeing has not declined. If anything, it has increased for a couple reasons. First of all, I think people are retiring, and that's because regardless of your political affiliation, nobody pretty much will argue with the fact that the market has done well enough for people's retirement funds to be healthy enough for them to leave. And so in the nonprofit sector, if they have their retirement fund is okay and they were planning to retire before this, they're still pursuing that course. Even more so because now if they were particularly in an essential service, healthcare, health and human services, they're exhausted and they are ready to exit. So that breaks open the field of leadership for Generation X to move in, and then millennials right behind them. So there is more opportunity right now that we're seeing for leadership for the next generation than we have in a while. Now, again, that could be regional and to where we are. But in talking to my colleagues, I think that we're seeing some of that across the country. So our client, when a nonprofit is hiring, this is a really interesting funky fact about nonprofits that's very different from the private sector. An executive director or a CEO is hired by the board of directors of a nonprofit. A board of directors are not nonprofit professionals. A board of directors are business leaders and private industry people. So private industry people are responsible for hiring the leadership of a nonprofit. And why that is funky is, can you imagine if you turned the tables on that and said, okay, so, GM is going to hire their next CEO by assembling a panel of nonprofit leaders. And that's how they're going to pick their next CEO. I mean, it just wouldn't happen. Yep. So it's an interesting kind of thing. And so what we see that boards are looking for in their next leaders, in their executive directors, and this is for every type of organization. It could be a nonprofit that's under $1 million budget or a nonprofit that's a $50 million plus budget. The key things that they're looking for a leader is I know leadership sounds like a really general term, but leadership that has been demonstrated through really effective staff management, through, that they've hired, they've fired, they have put people on kind of disciplinary things, that they have a mentoring kind of approach to leading. Those kinds of things are very important. Also, previous board experience. If you've not been in a nonprofit and you have not worked with a nonprofit board of directors, it can be a shock to the system because it is a very different governance model. And it's essential that somebody ascending to leadership have experience dealing with a board. If you are transitioning from the private sector to the nonprofit sector, which can happen, it's important that prior to doing that you yourself have served on a board and you've been on committees and you understand the financial picture and how that governance model works, because boards are looking for that in hiring. They're also looking for financial savvy. Just nonprofits have two goals, and that is to fulfill their mission and to fulfill their business mandate, which is to break even, if not make money. So somebody has to have a financial acumen that lends itself to really diverse funding, and which also will include the ability to do fundraising for some organizations. So if it's somebody that says like, I'm okay, I'm good with this, but like, don't ask me to ask for money, that's going to be a challenge for some boards of directors. And then, then it also just depends on the specific nature of the nonprofit. So there are nonprofits that are certainly going to look for programmatic expertise. So if it's a workforce development organization, they're going to look for somebody who has come from workforce development and things along those lines. People, I made a quick mention about sort of transitioning sectors, and there is a lot of misconception and stereotype on the part of the private sector and on the part of the nonprofit sector about moving from one to the other. The private sector has historically seen the nonprofit sector as the place that you go if you just didn't sort of have the chops to cut it in the business world, which is absolutely wrong. And from the nonprofits, when they get a call from an attorney or a professional that says, like, I'm retiring, but now I'd like to be an executive director. That is also met with, well, why would you think that you can do what I have dedicated my career to? Yeah. So there has to be, I think that all that thinking actually is in error. I don't think any of it is correct. I think that you can move around. But be aware of that if you are seeking to change sectors and how you present yourself, because there will be some inherent, I think, discrimination on both sides of those of that conversation.
It's interesting. You were talking a little bit about just the various nonprofits. Do you see people moving from an executive level position from one area or nonprofit, let's say healthcare nonprofits, to a totally different type of nonprofit? Do you see a lot of that jumping around from, okay, I'll start in this area and then I'll move over to this section, then I'll move to something else, or they typically stay in, that type of silo?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because we do see some prejudicial thinking right within the nonprofit sector, right? So a great example of that is in fundraising, which I want to make sure that I point out that probably the most number of jobs available in the nonprofit sector. There are never enough people to fill the need for really experienced and strong fundraisers. So for anybody that may be thinking about shifting careers or starting a career or changing, if you feel like you've got the competencies to be a fundraiser, which include fearlessness, which include the ability to tolerate rejection and not let your ego be damaged, which includes, and you notice that, a lot of these things are just generalized. You don't have to know necessarily the nonprofit sector in order to have those kinds of skills. So within all of that, I think that, especially in fundraising, there is some prejudice. Like if you've been in the arts and you've raised money, and then you want to work for a human service organization, there tends to be this thinking like, well, when you were at the arts, you had like a ready-made audience to fundraise from. Right. Over here, we have to stand out on the corner with a sandwich board to try to get people to support ours. And again, I think that is wrong, but I think that the ownership on that comes from the candidate who has to present themselves, understanding that may be a preconceived notion. And certainly sort of in your case, Tom, I think that higher ed, higher ed is nonprofit, but higher ed and healthcare sort of get their own little nonprofit, but right? Because they tend to be a little bit different. But what we see is people that want to move out of higher ed will sometimes be faced with that kind of prejudicial thinking, like, well, you had alumni to raise money from. We don't have that here. So just be aware of it and be able to contradict it with some really good evidence of your ability to be flexible and to adapt to that new environment that may be very different from where you came from.
Well, and I completely agree with everything you've said. I think that the one thing I wrote down earlier is passion about the mission. And I think especially when it comes to fundraising or many of these sectors, how do you, one of the questions I was going to ask you, which I think this leads into is, how do you convey not only your passion for the mission of that organization and for the service that it provides, but now that we're talking about executives who have decades of experience, and knowing that these nonprofits are looking for quite a bit, the list continues to grow of what they're looking for in an executive. How does one take that myriad of experiences and kind of condense it down into a way, on a resume and through an interview? How do you convey that to your clients in a way? What is the advice that you give to, to the prospective, employees that you're working with? Talk a little bit about that.
So, conveying passion is through action and not through words. So when I see somebody that just writes, a cover letter and simply states, I have a deep passion for the mission of the humane animal rescue. Well, that's great, but I'm looking through the resume. I don't see a single thing about animal welfare. There's nothing there. So how that is conveyed is through action. So if you are passionate about and want to work for the humane animal rescue, then sometime I should see that you were a donor, or that you did dog walking, or that you attended events, that you're a volunteer, that something where you put your money where your mouth is, I think is really essential. Because one of the things that is kind of a red flag that we'll see people is when they have moved around to 4 or 5 different organizations, and every single one of them is vastly different in the mission, because let me just say it this way. It's a very unique person who has the same level of passion for the opera that they do for economic development, than they do for animal welfare, than they do for sick children. I mean, somehow you have to have defined what a couple areas are your passion, and really stick in that lane and demonstrate that through action.
Well, and I think that's great advice even for our most recent graduates, as you said, it's acceptable to see them moving from position to position, but it's probably good advice for them to keep in mind that trying to stay within uh, a path to show that passion, right? So that when you get to this level of being an executive or trying to become an executive, there's that track record of being able to see it's clear you've got 2 or 3 or 4 passions, and this makes sense for the next jump for you.
That's exactly right. And from our perspective, if you've had 2 or 3 jobs in sort of one lane, so let's say you've worked for to use the arts, the opera, the symphony, and for the public theater, and then you make a change and you say, you know what, I really believe that I want to spend my time raising money for homelessness, and I really want to work in direct service with people who need basic essential services. To make that shift then is perfectly fine, but now understand that you've probably set your course in that direction. And be prepared to answer the question. Well, geez, you're coming from the arts. Can you share with us what it is about our organization that serves, food insecurity or whatever? Can share with us why that is important. Be prepared for that kind of challenge.
Great. I think that's excellent advice. I want to stick on this idea of preparation for the next step. Oftentimes, you hear it's about who you know, right? It's about the networks and the connections you have. And at the College of Worcester, mentoring is a key component of the educational experience. So, can you talk a little bit about what does that successful mentoring look like, and then maybe transition into how does one continue to not only build and grow your network, but I also think it's really important to kind of have deep relationships. So it's not just about knowing a bunch of people, it's about having those proven relationships with them where they can come to come to testify on your behalf. So you can talk about mentoring, and then kind of how do you develop your network.
Sure. I think that's that is key. And I'm going to take it a step further and actually talk a little bit about the difference between mentorship and sponsorship.
Okay.
Because I think that there's a difference there, and I think that you need to ask people and to utilize connections in different ways. So mentorship to me is, and why it's so important is, mentorship is part of your ongoing professional development and ongoing learning as a curious and competent, I think, professional. So a mentor to me is somebody that's going to provide you advice. When you need a sounding board, it's somebody that you can say, listen, I have these couple choices. What do you think? Or, so, if it's somebody that has more experience than you, it's somebody that, what did you do when you were faced with this? And can you help me to kind of process this and work through it? It's like a professional advice person that particularly, I think, mentorship within your professional arena. So, if you are in the nonprofits, having an executive director mentorship kind of relationship that you can go to say, listen, when you were faced with this as a career challenge, what did you do? And so I think that kind of thing is really important. I see sponsorship as far more action. I see sponsorship as if you are working in a college and university system and you are interested in growth, identifying somebody who you can actually ask to advocate on your behalf, to say, here's my resume. I just applied for this. Would you mind making sure, listen, you're not going to get me the job. I get myself the job, but could you act as a sponsor to help steward my resume to the right person, to make sure it's very action and it's very representative of you. So I think that particularly for people who are looking to advance and move up the sort of the leadership ladder, to have a sponsor that is further up the ladder, to say, listen, when this opportunity comes, particularly internally, please help me out with this. So I think that that's a very important role. And both mentors and sponsors, to me, are part of an overall network, right? And networking is such a buzzy word, and it has it's starting to get sort of negative connotations. One of the things that I actually enjoyed about stay at home was that I wasn't expected to be out 4 nights a week and traveling and networking all the time, because it's exhausting.
Yeah.
If you're not doing it, you feel like you're falling behind. I haven't talked to anybody, I haven't seen anybody. So there's this pressure to quote network. So the way I see networking, I'll give you a couple pragmatic, very practical things. So on my desk, I actually keep a list of people that as they pop into my head and I think, geez, I wonder how Tom's doing. Or I have not connected with this person in a really long time. I write down their name. And then once a week, I take a half hour and reach out to those people right now by email. Just, I'm thinking about you. How are you? And then in real life, when we move past this, those are people that I'll say, I would love to have the opportunity to get together with you. Very cautious about asking people to coffee because I'm very on guard about my time, and everybody would like to have a cup of coffee. And I once read an article on LinkedIn. A woman calculated how much time she spent meeting people for coffee, and it cost her $16,000 in billable hours over the course of a year. So I think that you have to be very respectful of people's time and how you do it. But the one key thing about networking I want to leave people with is networking is not about you asking for something from other people. Networking is about you offering to do something for other people. So what that means is, as you meet somebody, let's say you're at, one of these evening fundraising events or a community sponsored event, and you meet somebody that you're really interested in adding to your network and knowing and in sort of exploring a little bit more. Both personally, they're interesting to you, and professionally, you see that there's an alignment. The first thing that you should think about is, I wonder who I know, or I wonder what either skills or resources I have that would in some way benefit that person. And then as a follow-up, being able to say that, hey, Tom, I really enjoyed the opportunity to meet with you recently. In our conversation, it occurred to me that I know the director of Alumni at Notre Dame, and that might be somebody that would, you'd really enjoy an opportunity to speak with. May I make that connection for you? So now I've presented somebody with a benefit, and not just like, hey, Tom, do you know somebody here and can you help me do this? Right? It's about the other person.
It's excellent advice. I love, it's and the more you are interacting with people and meeting folks, the more you can be a connector
That's
for
right.
other people, right? And so then you're not the person who's always needing something when you're reaching
That's right.
out, but you're
Right.
saying, hey, Michelle, I thought of this person and I wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity to just meet each other because I think you'd find each other very interesting or
That's exactly right.
sector. Yeah. And I
Well,
love,
and it's not without personal benefit, because believe me, when you do that enough, when you need to call in a chit and you need to call in and say, hey, do you know somebody here? I really need access. Now people are much more willing, I think, to help you and to encourage you because you've already proven your value to them.
yeah. Yeah. And I love the idea of writing down names and once a week, again, I think it comes back to the intentionality
That's
and
right.
being specific about who you want to reach out to when they come into your mind and then setting time aside for that. I was, as you were talking about, the weekly events and, the 4 times a week and you're out there and I
Yeah.
wonder if you could just share some advice for those folks who are a bit introverted, right? And they have the maybe experience and the knowledge to be successful at the executive level, but that type of those types of events are either draining, exhausting, or take a lot of work to get ready for. Can you
Right.
just talk a little bit about some of those folks that you've worked with and what advice you've given them?
Um, not only can I, but I can also tell you I am an introvert. So while this little interview may not appear to be as such, or if there's anybody out watching this that knows me personally, they're going to be like, yeah, right, Michelle, you are no introvert. I am an introvert because, introvert and extrovert is defined by where you get your energy.
Yep.
It's not defined by how loud I am or how verbose I am, but I get my energy from being alone. After a certain amount of time in these, sort of very social, high pitched activities, I actually crash and I need time to recover. That's how I recover. So being an introvert does not mean being shy. And so my advice for that is, because it's a struggle for me. I mean, and my livelihood and as a business owner, and then even more so because I'm in the nonprofit sector, depends on my ability to be able to be physically seen and present. And so what I do is first of all, I am very conscious that I am allowed to say no.
Mm.
And I do not have to say yes to everything. And that is something that has only come with age and experience. I think when we're younger, we feel like if we don't say yes, we might miss out. And that may be seen as some kind of mark against us. But say no if you really do feel no. And I think that's legit. The other thing is be, again, to use your word, very intentional. Figure out those activities externally that are going to have the maximum benefit for your time, and say yes to those and commit to it. Just like if you don't like going to the gym, but it's good for you and you have to make yourself go, you have to do the same thing in terms of events, which is I'm going to say that I have to attend 5 a month. I'm going to very carefully choose what those are. I'm going to support them financially and by being present. But I also know that the first half of the event is probably the biggest benefit. I'm only going to go that long, and then I'm going to leave. So give yourself permission to have parameters, to say no, but also be disciplined with yourself that it is important to say yes to some things and make yourself do them.
That's excellent advice. I appreciate that a lot. Lastly, we started off talking a little bit about, how COVID has changed the entire kind of how we work, how we communicate, how we interact with people. If someone is considering making a transition at this time, what are some things that they need to be aware of? Are there things that you've said, this is a little bit different during this time than maybe previously? And, what should our viewers be thinking about?
Um, so the biggest difference, and we have the experience Nonprofit Talent has done during the 3 months of stay at home, we did 3 executive director searches from beginning all the way to the person starting on the job.
Wow.
And that meant I never met them in person. The search committee never met them in person for a first interview or a second interview. The hired person never saw the facility or met with any staff, and they started their new job from working at home.
Wow.
And so, yeah, wow. I mean, I don't know if I would have had the capacity to do that.
Yeah.
That is really special. That's special from the executive director, but it's also the board who is willing to sort of take this like leap of trust
Yep.
in never seeing the person in person. So I think that people need to have the flexibility about the search process itself.
Mm-hmm.
When you are a candidate, you're being evaluated during the search process, not just in your interview, but every single move you make. So if it is seen that you are, this is a possible risk. If it's seen that you are so rigid that it is difficult for you to accept that you need to have a Zoom interview and it can't be in person, or that you may not have the opportunity to meet staff before you start, that can be seen as the way you're going to manage the organization, and not necessarily be an asset. So I think the 3 people that we did, how the board interpreted that was, these are people we want on our team because they're going to just be able to roll with the punches, understand that every day at our organization is something brand new and unplanned. And we have confidence that that's how they are going to be able to operate. So I think that you have to be incredibly flexible. Now, with that said, I'm also not suggesting that you have to take a job without ever seeing the facility. I also think it is legitimate for an organization to put their search on hold. So for those people who may be watching this that may not be a candidate, but may be in a situation to hire because you sit on a board, or you are part of a nonprofit executive search process, or even just a hiring process at a lower mid-level position, it is okay to say, let's just pause. Let's just stop for a minute. We will resume this. Our organization is stable enough and it's okay enough to be able to ride this out until we can make sure that we bring the person in socially distanced safety to campus or to the organization. So I think that either way is okay, but the key ingredient is flexibility.
Well, I think, and I also think that for those folks who are in an organization right now, and there's the possibility for a search, and if the organization puts it on hold, I mean, that could be a chance for that individual to say, let me take on a little more and prove to the people who are doing the hiring that, gosh, I could really step into this role, and so they could use that as an advantage.
That's exactly right. And even externally, what we see right now is, CEO level jobs of executive of an organization which you feel passionate about, or an ED, or even a senior member of the team, they don't come up every day.
Right.
Those are jobs sometimes that people will retire from. So, it could be 20 years again before those kinds of leadership opportunities present themselves. So if you are somebody that has been poised and ready for that leadership, you cannot let this particular time and this particular challenge of COVID stop you from pursuing those opportunities, because it could be exactly the right one for you and you don't want to miss that.
Yeah. Well, Michelle, this has been fascinating. I think you have given some really fantastic advice pretty much for anyone at all levels of their career development. I want to thank you for spending time with us and sharing your great insight. And we'll make sure we put up your website, organization, and that type of information so that people can learn a little bit more and see the great work that you're doing. But I just want to say thank you for spending time with us.
Absolutely, Tom. And you know what? I want to thank you. I think that, the College of Worcester as a community of continuous learning is a huge benefit and asset to all of us as alumni. And it doesn't matter if you are graduating in the last 5 years, or if you are part of a class that was, like me, 30 plus years. That Worcester, I think, stands the test of time, both in terms of the quality of our education and how that really helped to uplift us as professionals, but also as an institution I wouldn't hesitate, even at this point in my career, to circle back at some point if I had a question, to ask either the academic arena or like career development of Worcester to say, hey, listen, do you have some insight for this? And I think that is a resource that people long after graduation should take advantage of. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. It's great to talk with everybody, and I look forward to the day where we can do it in person.
Yeah, same here for sure. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. And as I said at the start, the rest of our Alumni Insight series is on our website. So we look forward to doing more of these and sharing, great, wonderful content from our experts. One of our greatest resources, our alumni. So thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Michelle. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe. Take care.
Bye-bye.